And good morning, everyone. Welcome to Chat CANNA. It is Thursday, the 17th of September, definitely on the downhill side, but I think the frost is gone. We always get that, I'm telling you, winter is coming frost, and then it gets nice again. And I think, at least for me, walking over to the studio this morning, it was quite nice. We have a great guest on for you today that it's got so much stuff wrapped up here in his head. We're going to talk. We could talk for hours. I know just in the little bit of pre-talk we've done, there's lots of information to share with you today. So grab a cup of coffee, grab your chair and sit down. If you're driving, put it on cruise, because here we go. First, my guest. Here she is, Veronica Michael from Prairie Products down in Fargo. Say hi, Veronica.
Hey, everyone. Nice to see you today. We are really lucky to have Ryan. Ryan is from Dickinson's Research Extension Center, and he's here to talk to us about hemp and kind of the work that he's doing in hemp out there. And Ryan, it's Ryan Buetow, right?
Correct. Yeah, Ryan Buetow. I'm an extension cropping system specialist here at the NDSU Dickinson Research Extension Center. So there are multiple research extension centers throughout the state of North Dakota, and we're just here to do applied research, really help those producers and farmers to make sure that they don't have to make those crazy ideas happen. We can try them out, and that way that if it works, then they can try it out as well, right? And help them improve their operations.
Great. So then the other day, a guy came to me and said, I heard I can take $10,000 and turn it into $100,000. So you're the guy that can verify that for somebody, right?
Well, if you go to Deadwood, you might be able to make that happen.
But not in hemp? Are you saying not in hemp?
You got to be careful. You want to make sure that you have a contract ahead of time and make sure that you're not putting all that risk. Some guys are more able to handle that risk than others, and you just got to make sure that you're being realistic with your goals and making sure that if you think that you can make it happen, go for it. And sometimes you just got to try something out. But if you're trying something out, start small and don't put the whole farm into something. So
well, I guess
yeah.
So now, Ryan, we want to know a little bit more about you. So where are you from, and what's your educational background?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the small town of Cologne, Minnesota, in the southwest of the Twin Cities. I grew up next door to my grandpa's dairy farm, grew up around agriculture my whole life. After graduating high school in Waconia, Minnesota, I went to NDSU, actually originally for engineering, agricultural engineering, and realized that math is very difficult. And I had spent a summer as a crop scout back in Cologne, and really was good at it, really enjoyed it, got to be outside, work with plants. So I switched to crop and weed science and got a minor in botany. And then after that degree, I worked with Dr. Hans Kandel towards a master's degree, focusing on soybean and dry bean production. And that was kind of my introduction to extension. So Hans is the extension broadleaf agronomist for NDSU. So I got to work with farmers and really applied stuff that can help people with their operations. And also that trip kind of introduced me to international development and that kind of stuff. Both Hans, my master's advisor, and Joel, who's my current PhD advisor, they both done a lot of work overseas, Africa, Southeast Asia, Mexico. And so I got to go to Nepal during my master's degree to work with producers over there and see research and that kind of stuff. So that was awesome.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it really reminds you of why you do this type of stuff. It's more than just getting that bottom line to be positive over there. You're helping people with their livelihood, and it could be the difference between whether the kid gets to go to college or to school, just school in general. Or if they don't have enough to eat and they're malnourished, that kind of stuff.
You shared also that you were in Zambia for 3 weeks was it last year?
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm gonna mute myself quick to cough. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I gotta get my mask on here.
I'm not. Yeah, I actually had COVID for a little bit. I'm not contagious though. So.
Oh, just a little bit of COVID, just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I went to Zambia for 3 weeks with an NGO. The great thing about NDSU is that we're all about lifelong learning, and this really fit with our mission. So I didn't have to take, I was able to go over there and work with this nonprofit called CNFA, Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture. And I worked with smallholder farmers, and they kind of focused on gender mainstreaming, so making sure that women were part of the conversation, and helping them with the soybean and sunflower production, which is fairly new to a lot of them because they mostly grow maize or corn. So getting something else in that rotation, because you can't grow corn year after year or else you're going to see a lot of issues. So helping them with that, and it was an awesome experience, and hopefully I can continue to do stuff like that. So
yeah. Wow. Well, I guess we probably should talk about hemp.
Yeah. So hemp is one of the many crops I work with here. And the great thing about Southwest North Dakota compared to where I'm from in Minnesota is that there's a very wide range of crops, which is great because that means guys maybe aren't as afraid to try something new out here. We have a lot of different oil seeds. You're talking sunflower, soybean, canola. So hemp kind of fits into that mix pretty well. And especially when you have some of these wheat heavy crop rotations, it's nice to get a broadleaf into the mix. And we want to make sure that, we can try out these varieties for people. So we have a variety trial. This is the second year we've had a variety trial at the Dickinson Research Center. It's the third year that we've had hemp. Back in 2018, we were able to get some seed from Burton Johnson, who's really spearheaded the hemp research at NDSU, as well as Brian Hansen. But they got us some seed back in 2018. We got it a little late, so it didn't grow as well as we'd wanted to, but that allowed us to practice, harvesting it, making sure we got the combine settings right. And that really set us up for success in 2019 with our variety trial, where NDSU decided to kind of go more statewide to have it at more of the research centers. And it's really interesting just to kind of see the yield differences. I mean, because we have a very wide moisture range in the state. I mean, you go to Langdon, North Dakota, up in the northeast corner near Canada, they have a lot more moisture than us. Down here, there's cacti growing, so we got the Badlands out here. It can get very dry. We have droughts very frequently, including this year. And with the drought earlier in the summer, we did see a lot shorter hemp. So it's kind of nice to see it over multiple years because you can see what the potential is, because it was a lot wetter last year. But yeah, it's awesome to be working with hemp. I've worked with Leslie Lubenow and Burton Johnson putting together a little hemp publication for NDSU focusing on that grain production, because really I am an agronomist, and there are multiple market classes of hemp, right? So we got to make sure that we can differentiate that one is more of an agronomic crop and one is maybe more of a horticultural crop.
And let's tear that apart just a little bit for our listeners. So because I think that what I'm hearing from you is that we're talking about what we term as industrial hemp, planted like grass across a field,
Yep.
much like wheat would be planted, and probably no watering at all through the year.
Right. So we're all dryland agriculture in this part of the state. You go up towards Williston and the Nissen Valley there, they have a lot of irrigation, but a large majority of the state of North Dakota is dryland agriculture. So when you're talking these smaller acreages, you're able to get maybe some drip irrigation or something like that out there. But yeah, we're talking industrial hemp. At least at our research center, we're drilling it in. So we're talking very short row spacing. So that's what we're looking for. Some of the variety trials will have the dual purpose varieties in there, but we're not harvesting for that fiber because there really hasn't been too much of a market for that yet. Hopefully something, eventually emerges, but we're just focusing on what we think will be most productive to helping our producers in our area.
Sure, of course. And where do you see those seeds then going? Are they yet just becoming seeds for more seeds, or do you see the seeds going into food or oil from those seeds?
I see those going into food or oil. There's a lot of processing facilities really popping up. I mean, the first one that you think of that really came to fruition in the state was in Carrington with Roger Gush's. But from my understanding, that there's a pretty large one in Sydney, if I remember correctly, and then there's a few more in Montana, and we're an hour from Montana here in Dickinson. So, yeah, we're looking more at the crushing from my understanding.
Okay. All right.
You made a comment early on, and I think it's something that people like you who are so skilled and educated in agriculture will say. And you said it's important to have a broadleaf in the rotation. For people who are maybe listening because they have an interest in hemp and are not as educated in farming, can you explain what that means?
Absolutely. So crop rotation is an important tool in the farmer's toolbox, right? So normally when you think about management on a farm, you're thinking about, pesticides, using proper seed, that kind of stuff. But crop rotation is a huge part of managing different pests. So if you grow wheat year after year after year, certain pests, like say a disease or an insect, can start to build up. Along with that, you also have certain weeds. So let's say that you're growing wheat, which is a grass. The herbicides that you're using are really good at taking out broadleafs. So things like your pigweeds, or the one that a lot of people have heard of, Palmer amaranth, right? So these broadleaf weeds can be controlled easier if you're growing a grass. But that means that there's certain grasses that you might not be able to take out. So those grass weeds, they put out more seed, and that starts to build up over time to where it becomes a major issue, like something like maybe wild oats. And maybe there's a few chemicals that can take that out, but over time, if you use that chemical too much, it might become, the plant could attain a resistance to it through mutations, right? Just natural mutations over time. So we want to try to put something else into that mix so that, one, those disease residues don't build up over time. Two, certain insects that specify on that certain crop don't build up over time. And three, so that we can manage weeds much better in those fields. So if you start to grow the same crop over and over again, there are certain issues that will come up. But also in crop rotation, you need to keep in mind that there are herbicide residues that may damage crops. So you got to be careful with, there's a lot of moving parts on a farm, and it's not as easy as some people might think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, it makes me think of something else that I wanted to come back to, which was the issue of acidic soil in North Dakota. Is it something that you've done work and research in, correct?
Yeah. So we've started to notice some low pH soils, right? So pH is kind of the amount of hydrogen in the soil. So what happens is, over time, especially here where we have no-till agriculture, where we're not tilling the ground, when we put fertilizer down, that fertilizer is going in the same strip. So we have, and this nitrogen fertilizer, when it goes in the soil, there's this large nitrogen cycle where nitrogen kind of moves in all these different directions through being kind of consumed by bacteria, or leaching down in the ground, or going up into the air. 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. There's a lot of nitrogen up there, but that's in a form that the plant can't use. So we put fertilizer down to make sure that the plant has that nitrogen, which is one of the most important nutrients for plants. But when that fertilizer goes into the ground, it changes forms, and in that process releases hydrogen ions. So those little hydrogen ions start to concentrate and saturate over years, and the types of soils we have don't really have a great buffering capacity. Carbonates are what you really want to buffer out that hydrogen.
So they're acidic. Those little things are acidic that are going.
The hydrogen is causing acidity. So the fertilizer acidifies the soil, but the soil, some soils, especially ones that are heavy in limestone, are able to buffer out that hydrogen. But we don't have that in our soil. So the best way to manage it is to apply lime. So whether that's calcitic lime from like a limestone quarry, we don't really have those in Southwest North Dakota. So the nearest source is beet lime. So when they make sugar from sugar beets, they use lime to extract the sugar and make sure it's nice and clean and pure, right? So there's a large pile of sugar beet lime in Sydney that they just give away, right? So they need to get rid of it.
Take it away.
Take it all, take it all, right? So but that's not exactly cheap, because in order to actually neutralize that soil, you need tons of lime per acre, right? We're talking minimum 2 tons of lime per acre. And when you have a large field that's seeing this issue, that can be very expensive, all right? So we're not only looking at liming, especially surface applied liming, because guys don't really want to till out here because that impacts the soil's water holding capacity, and moisture is extremely important. We want to try to hold on to that moisture in our drier environment as much as possible. So they're surface applying the lime, and what Chris Augustine and I are doing, Chris Augustine is the director here at the Dickinson Research Center. He was formerly a soil health specialist up in Minot. And what we're doing is looking at these different rates of lime and tracking over time how they go into the soil. But this acidity is really only in that top root zone. We're seeing pHs as low. The lowest I've seen is 3.9. But anytime that pH drops below 5.5, that's when aluminum in the soil becomes more available. So aluminum is one of the most common metals out there. It's all over the soil, but it's not soluble. The plant can't take it up as long as the pH is above 5.5. So pH really impacts chemistry. So when that aluminum becomes available, it's toxic to the plant, and it shrinks up the root system. So you get these little stunted roots from aluminum toxicity. And so in a year that you have a drought, you can imagine with a stunted root system that field is going to look really bad. When there's a lot of moisture, you might not see it as heavily, but there's still that little bit of yield loss. But especially in a drier environment, you're going to see major yield loss from this issue. So liming is preferred, but whether it's maybe rented ground where you can't quite afford to, or you can't work something out with the landlord, because liming should last you a while, but you can't really split it out over 10 years if you got a 3-year, lease or something like that, right? So it's a major issue that's causing a lot of yield loss. You get to other parts of the country where liming is something that they do every 3 years, right? But we don't really have that source of lime, and guys out here aren't really used to that. On top of that, this low pH issue is only stratified where that nitrogen is being put. So whether it's surface applied urea, then it's gonna be in those top, 2-3 inches. If it's banded down with anhydrous, it's maybe a little bit deeper at that 6 inches, which can be a little bit harder to do with surface applied lime. But a lot of guys, when they soil sample, they're doing a 0 to 12, right? So that pH gets diluted from that deeper soil, and they're not noticing that they have an issue. So they're seeing this issue and like, why is this happening? So with this low pH issue, guys really need to make sure that they're going out there and breaking up that soil sample for pH. I'd prefer a 0 to 3 and a 3 to 6 to really break out that pH to see if there's an issue. And this is something where you can use precision agriculture to find these spots. If you have low yields on your yield map, or even like a drone image or something like that, you'd be able to pick these spots out. If there's yield loss, it's probably worth checking out to see. We see it a lot more often on the edge of fields where maybe guys, when they're turning around, maybe they had, extra nitrogen got put down there or something like that, or maybe those base cations got leached down because it's a low spot or something like that. So there's differences. So not every crop is created equal with this issue. A lot of the grasses can handle it a lot better, like your wheat, oats, corn can handle it fairly well. But things like barley and durum, which we have a lot of acres out in this part of the state, do not handle it well at all, as well as canola and safflower are highly sensitive. Your legumes, so your soybeans, peas, lentils, chickpeas, all crops that we grow out here, they get hit twice as hard because not only does acidity impact nutrient availability, but it also impacts bacterial growth. So as that pH drops, the activity of those bacteria slow, and we need those bacteria to fix nitrogen, right? So the great benefit about having a legume in the rotation is that they form a relationship with bacteria, and those bacteria fix that 78% of the atmosphere of nitrogen and make it available to the plant. But if the plant can't get that nitrogen, you have to apply nitrogen, and that completely removes the benefit of having that legume in the rotation. So it's a pretty complex issue, and I could probably talk about it for an hour, but you guys want to talk about hemp.
Well, but one question on that though, do the words acid rain influence that at all, or is that somewhere else and not a problem?
That shouldn't be impacting us for this issue. This is something it's just a majority of it is our soil type, but also it's really those N fertilizers. So those nitrogen fertilizers, the types that we use, any ammonium-based fertilizer, but also even, it happens a lot faster with those.
Sure.
We're putting higher rates down, especially as we're seeing corn move into the western part of the state here. So we're seeing these high rates of N, and it's just acidifying it because we don't have that carbonates in the soil to buffer out that hydrogen.
So what's 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years? I'm sure you guys sit and consider that, especially in this no-till. You're talking, we have machinery here in the valley that goes down we
right.
detail down
and there's
18
been a
inches.
few guys that have tried tilling, but my concern there is that depending on the soil, we don't really have those carbonates in the zone that tillage equipment can reach. So you're not really bringing those carbonates back up. So over time, you could, if you did use tillage to try to fix it, you might end up acidifying that entire subsoil.
Sure.
So really what you need to do is apply lime, because it's a chemistry issue.
Seems to be the
But
magic word.
there are Band-Aids to kind of get by. So that's that crop selection. There is some genetic tolerance to aluminum toxicity. There's a variety of wheat out of Montana called Lanning, which has a gene that allows it to grow. And then just choosing a crop that can grow well. But and there's also some studies showing phosphorus applied in furrow with cereals can increase yields to close of that of a lined field. So putting some phosphorus in furrow ties up that aluminum in the root zone and allows the plant to kind of grow through it. I did try some hemp in pots with some acidic soil. And so I guess we're getting a little bit into the hemp production, but hemp doesn't do a great job of germinating sometimes, right? Very low germination rates, especially compared to some of these crops that we've been working with for years. And we also see reduction in germination when we have stand loss from this pH issue. And when I put these plants in pots, it was pretty extreme, where only a couple will grow and they'd be half the size of the ones that were in a more neutral soil. So I haven't repeated that trial yet. Just kind of wanted to try it out to see how it would look, but that's something that I want to continue to do, is see how hemp does and if there's any difference in varieties. I just tried 2 varieties out. I can't remember what they were off the top of my head. I think it was Grandy and something else. But
so what is it like working with hemp in this kind of semi-arid North Dakota?
Absolutely. So when you think of hemp, you're thinking of, maybe Kentucky or, Pacific Northwest, where you have all this moisture, or somewhere where there's more irrigation. But we can get very dry out here, and that's going to end up reducing our yield potential. It's the same thing with soybeans out here. When you're growing a crop, you're not expecting to see the yields that they're seeing in Iowa and Illinois, right? So this kind of makes us think about, well, we got to make sure that we're getting that seed into moisture. So we don't want to get out there too early, but we really depend on that early season moisture to get that crop up so it can compete with any weeds that are coming up. A benefit of this region is that we have a whole lot of wheat. So those wheat rotations, there's not going to be a whole lot of broadleaf weeds that are going to damage. Really, because you don't have a whole lot of options for managing weeds in your hemp out here. So
that's right.
Yeah, that moisture is a huge part of it, and it can suck, right? You don't have that yield potential that some of those areas have. But on top of that, you don't have those large inputs either. So as long as you understand that you don't have the potential to reach this yield, you can put, maybe less inputs into that hemp, fertilizer inputs. But yeah, it's another benefit of being a little bit drier is that we don't also have that disease pressure as well. So when you're talking about diseases in crops, you need to think about the disease triangle, right? So in order for disease to happen, you need to have these three corners of the triangle. I like to think of them as legs on a stool, right? So you need, if one of those legs is missing, you have three legs. If one of them misses, the stool falls over, right? So those three legs of the disease triangle are, you need to have the pathogen present,
Okay.
you need to have the host present, then you need to have the right environment for that disease, for that pathogen to, infest the host. So when you go to these more wet environments, Northeast, North Dakota, Minnesota, you see a lot of white mold, especially with the crop rotation of being fairly heavy in soybeans. You can see some really bad white mold. And up in Langdon, I believe that they had a little bit of white mold in some of their trials last year when it got so wet. So having that reduced disease pressure, I think, is beneficial to the producers in this drier climate, because it can hopefully allow for some higher quality down the road. But yeah, there's pros and cons.
Oh, I have a friend down by Minneapolis had black mold from soybeans inside the stalks. You open it up and there's these little black divots inside.
Is it like a charcoal rot, or is it called black
charcoal
mold?
Yeah, no, charcoal
Okay.
is the right word. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But it was black inside. You'd open it up and there was all these little divots of black, and it basically ruined his 80 acres.
Yeah.
So,
I'm also I work a lot with sunflowers in this part of the state, so I run the National Sunflower Association has a national production survey every 2 years where we go out in the fields and kind of help them set their research priorities by looking for what are the major diseases this year, the major insects. So I work with people to kind of coordinate the survey, and sunflowers can get a lot of disease in some years, and I have a feeling that a lot of those diseases would also transfer over to hemp.
I would think so. The stock is much the same, at least in the CBD stocks. So yeah,
and that's what makes me wonder. I want to learn more about the white mold in hemp, because with sunflowers, the sclerotinia, the white mold can not only impact the roots and the stalk, but also the head. So you can get this growth in the head.
Yeah, the big bad.
And I'm pretty sure that with hemp, the white mold can impact the bud and the stalk. So I wonder if it's fairly similar to sunflower. I haven't looked much into that yet, but I'm guessing that it's fairly similar.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
But yeah.
Wow.
So with a new crop like hemp, what do farmers need to consider before planting?
Absolutely, yeah. So especially if they're a new farmer to hemp, the first thing that they should do is make sure that they're legal, right? So work with the North Dakota Department of Ag to make sure that you're certified to grow hemp in the state, and make sure that you're growing a variety that is approved. I would also be sure to look at your local research center, the closest one to you, or maybe a couple around you, to see what varieties are doing better in your region, and start small. It's gonna take some time to figure out how this seed works with your planting equipment, your harvest equipment, and this applies to every new crop that you try. Whether it's soybeans, hemp, anything like that. Because there's a lot to figure out, and it's going to take some time. I would definitely start small your first year. You can always go bigger. Second, make sure that you have a contract figured out. I'm definitely not an economist, but you got to make sure that things pencil out for your operation, because times are tough these days, and you can't afford to have a major loss like that. So.
Oh, hey.
Exactly.
When you're combining hemp, are you watching moisture content, or is it if it's ready to combine, can you put it in the bin? How is that at the harvest time?
Yeah, so I mean, that's another thing that you have to think about too, right? And I think part of that too is, where is it going? Are you allowed to dry it down? Stuff like that. I would also something kind of anecdotal that I learned from some of the research agronomists is that once you start to see mourning doves, once you start to see doves out in the field, go harvest.
Classic scientific evidence.
Super scientific. Because if you don't get out there, the birds are going to take a large part of your yield, and that's a similar issue to blackbirds and sunflowers, right? We see major losses in some areas from blackbirds. So even though the crop might not quite be there, if you don't get out there, the seed might not be there. So you obviously don't want to go in there if it's too wet. You got to make sure that it's dry enough that it will go through the equipment, and that you can that seed is ready to be able to dry down and really hold its quality. But it's a fine line, and you don't want to wait too long, because especially in our small plots where we have a lot smaller plot than what the farmer's dealing with.
Okay.
So these are the, we're talking 5 foot by 25 foot, and then there's 4 replications. So let's say this year we had almost 10 varieties that we were trying out. So this is a pretty small, it's maybe less than a half acre of stuff we're working with. So those birds come in and they can really do devastation.
Yeah.
But with a major field, we're talking, just the corners of the field, or if there's a tree row, it's along that edge. So it's not going to impact the farmer as badly as it impacts us, but you're still losing some seed. But the thing about hemp, it's a bit newer crop. Maybe not in some parts of the world, but there hasn't been as much breeding as you see in things like corn and soybeans. So you don't really have as good of, how do I say this? The seed falls off a lot more. You have a lot of seed loss just from natural causes as well as from the birds. So you have to make sure that you get out there before the seed starts to drop. It's a fine line, and I think each one's going to have to be a case-by-case basis.
And then you talked about a dryer. So does the hemp that's harvested industrially generally hit a dryer?
I'm not 100% sure. At least here at the research center, we do dry ours.
Okay.
But
And
I would assume,
do you need to watch temperature then, or is that only if it's going for seed the next year that you have to really watch the temperature in the dryer? Or
I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that quite yet. And there probably is some information on that out there, and I'd have to look into it. But I'm not 100% sure, because I know that hemp doesn't hold as well as some other seeds, right? You can't harvest it and hold on to it for 3 years and expect to have high germination rates.
So we can't send it to Sweden in that thing up in the mountains where they're putting seeds away for the catastrophe that may come upon.
Well, I would hope that those scientists up there have a good way to freeze it real nice where it can hold, but I don't know.
So there might be a way to put it in hibernation, but you're saying generally the seed has to get raised for the next year's seed every year to
right. So I mean, when we think of seed, we're thinking of something that we can eat or something that we can plant, right? But when the plant thinks of seed, it's thinking, this is my offspring. I want to reproduce, right?
Right.
And so what it wants to do is it wants to drop that seed on the ground so that it can grow, right? But what we're trying to do is collect that seed, put it in storage, and then to plant it at a later date. But what that plant wants to do is it just wants to drop it and let it grow, right? And that's why we see volunteer crops, the next year when we're trying to grow something else. I think that'll come with breeding over time, is that we can start to see once more money kind of starts flowing into varieties, that we'll see better germination and better storage.
Well, there is. I mean, we are just in the beginning of a lot of research in the U.S. in hemp. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg. If you had a magic wand and you could get all of the money you wanted and do any kind of research in hemp, what would you do, Ryan?
Well, money is great, but time is also extremely important when it comes to research, because there are a lot of things that I want to research. But with hemp, the thing that I think impacts the farmers the most is when you get these spikes in THC. So if we could find out what's causing those and how to avoid those, I mean, that could help a disaster from happening, because you get these guys that put all this money into a field, and then they have to go out and test to make sure that it's not above 0.3, which in my opinion is a fairly random number. But all of a sudden maybe something was.
It is what it is.
But it's what we have to follow. So if maybe there's too much heat during the flowering period, or maybe someone has too much nitrogen at a certain time. We don't completely understand that. We do know that there are some very heavy genetic factors that go into it, but a variety that could do fine one year and under a certain environment could do differently another year. So getting a better understanding of what's causing those THC spikes and how we can avoid those, so that producers can not have to destroy their entire field and all their hard work. Ideally, we wouldn't have to worry about those THC standards, and because it's such a small amount, but it's the world that we live in. So along with that, or go ahead.
So far, I'm hearing that you're talking about taking the plant, the seed area off the plant. And what's happening from where the seeds end to the ground? Is that at the moment mostly being ignored, or are we making plans for getting the silk or the herd or whatever's left over yet?
So what we're working with is what we think our farmers are going to use out here. And we have a lot of guys that grow grain in my part of the state. So we're just really focusing on that grain production. When I think of that, we need to have the market for it in order for us to really. There's not a whole lot of money in hemp currently for a researcher, so we need to make sure that we're using our time effectively and our money effectively, and focusing on how can we impact the producer the most. So we're focusing on that grain.
Up there right now. Okay.
Yep. Right. I do think that over time that, if you can get both a fiber and a grain from the same field, that's awesome use of land. But right now, it seems like the market's pretty heavily saturated by cotton, and I don't know if I don't think those folks would be too happy if we hopped into their tight market as well. So it's
but paper, we could maybe we could make an inroad into paper a little bit and start somewhere.
Yeah, there's so many uses for these things, and so it's, do we grow a crop that we know can do this, or do we invest in a crop that we already grow a lot of and can grow very well, and through some chemistry can make things out of, like, for example, soybeans, you can make insulation and stuff like that from the leftovers from the process of soybean processing. So, it's how do we use our land most efficiently? And the problem is, if you grow the same crop year after year, you start to see these issues. So what I like about hemp is that you're adding more diversity into these crop rotations. But there's a lot of moving pieces. And along with that, there's a lot of moving dollars. And it's very difficult to predict too far into the future, because a lot can happen. And I think a lot of positive change can happen with hemp. Once corn hybrids became highly effective, yields jumped greatly, right? So with some breeding, as well as more agronomic management, we can really make hemp highly productive. But there are other crops out there that are highly productive as well.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
Veronica?
Well, no, I this has been great. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. I think hemp has a lot of potential. And you look at something like canola, which not a whole lot of people know, but canola is actually an acronym, right? Or it stands for Canada Oil Low Acid. So it's a type of mustard that was bred in the, I think, 60s or 70s. And now canola, over a period of 50 some years, has become a major crop in North Dakota, right? So these new crops have potential to really blow up and do well. And it just, there's a lot of factors at play. I'm hoping that hemp can take off. It's really fun to work with. And I think as we kind of get some of the kinks kind of figured out, and you're starting to see a lot of people producing it. And the super interesting thing about this plant is that it has so many different uses, not only in agronomic production, but also in horticultural production with the CBD. And it'll be exciting to see what happens with that, reducing inflammation and all that fun stuff. So, it's a very interesting plant that has a very interesting history. And a lot of stigma associated as well in some cases. And getting over that stigma, making sure people are associating with a crop that you can't get high off of is important to me, to make sure that people separate out these different market classes.
Yes, this from this, yes.
We
Yeah.
agree. We totally agree, Ryan.
I got to go back to the field one more time. The way you're thinking about it. So we're taking the seed stock off the top. What is happening then out in North Dakota with the, from 5 foot to the ground? Does that get rototilled or chopped up some way and left on the surface?
So guys are trying different things. Here at the research center, we just plant back into it. When you run with sunflowers, you have a whole lot of stock left behind as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you can have some hairpinning and that kind of stuff. So you do need to be careful, and that's where residue management comes in. Maybe there's a few guys that are probably going out there with whether it's vertical tillage or harrowing,
right?
Depending on how hardcore no-till they are, it really comes down to. So, but we've had success planting right into it.
But you're leaving the long shreds just
Yep.
right.
So when you drive over with the planter, those knock right down.
Yeah.
They sit over the winter. They capture some snow, and over time they just they're definitely very strong. I mean, you could go out there, pull some, and make some twine out of it pretty easily. So
yeah. So but you just kind of let God take care of them. Right.
So I mean, there's definitely a use for it, but a lot of the times you're better off leaving that residue behind for your soil health. When you're looking at wheat, a lot of guys are using stripper headers in some cases out here, which leaves a whole lot of stem behind. So when they go out there with a stripper header for wheat, they just pull those heads off. So you have this long stalk that's left there, right? So some guys will go out there and harvest the straw, which has a use. But a lot of guys leave it out there because there's a huge benefit to leaving that out there. It collects snow in our more dry environment. That snow turns into water, right? And we want to hold on to our water. I know some folks in the eastern part of the state are like, why would you want to do that? But but we have really high quality soil aggregation because of no-till. So that builds up your biology in the soil, which allows that water that soil to be able to penetrate water much easier and hold on to that water while still being able to drive over it. So we want to try to trap snow. We want to try to hold on to that stuff, as well as the nutrients that are in that stem can hopefully move into that soil again. So, but there is some planting issues that need to be addressed as well. But that can be worked a few different ways depending on what equipment the farmer has.
Hey, pretty soon we'll plant with drones that are machine gunning into the ground from 5 feet in the air. They'll just go.
Yeah, I actually have a really cool Phantom 4 with a fancy NDVI camera on it that I've been using for some of my plots. I got certified to fly the drones this past year.
All right.
It's really fun to work with. I don't know how applicable it can be for everyone, but it's really cool technology that's really growing the past couple of years here. And North Dakota's really leading the country in a lot of drone research too. So
it's all good. We're all moving forward, and we're hoping to bring, the information you've shared today should be, matter of fact, I know that our friend up in Buetow will be using this program as one of his teaching aids, because you have just brought forth a whole bunch of information.
This was great.
The acidic soil thing, wonderful, and the no-till stuff.
But even just the broadleaf rotation, like things you explained that were so helpful.
Good. Yeah, I hope I'm useful sometimes. I have a lot of info and I sometimes just blurt it out. But
well, if you'd like to blurt it out again, please come back.
Yes.
We love talking about, what research is happening, just like you said earlier, so that farmers can feel confident that that the economics of this work. So whenever you want to share, please come back, and we're willing to see you in the field, or we're really curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And stay healthy out there. We wear protective equipment when we spray herbicides, so wear protective equipment when you're out in public as well. So.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Hey, it's been a wonderful show. Always get a hold of any of us. We've had it come by on the screen, so you can find a connection in one way or another. We hope that you'll join us again on Monday for Have You Heard, our quick shows on Monday and Wednesday, of course, or our in-depth programs on Tuesday or Thursday. Always a joy to have Veronica with us as my co-host here, because she just brings a whole nother perspective and wow, processing and everything. Veronica, take just a moment. Tell us what's available at Prairie Products in Fargo.
So I hope that you can check out prairieproductsnd.com. We are cold ethanol extractors in Fargo, and we also produce a variety of retail products for you, from topicals, chewables, to something even for your pet. So check us out online, and we'll ship directly to you. No contact needed.
All righty. Ryan, we always give our guests almost the last word. I get to say goodbye at the end, but anything you want to share, or anything you didn't remember during the show?
Yeah, be sure to use your local extension office. We have all kinds of information for you, whether it's stuff at the home, talk to your county office, or look into the type of research that's being done at the research centers across the state here in North Dakota, or in your state. There's an extension system thanks to the Morrill Act back after the Civil War. So make sure that you're using those resources that we have available. And if you have any questions about crops here in Southwest North Dakota, or something that I work with that maybe is being worked with in your area, feel free to give me a call at 701-456-1106, or my email, which I think was across the bottom at one point.
Has been going across the bottom several times.
Yep. So feel free to reach out, or you could just Google the NDSU Dickinson Research Extension Center, and we have all kinds of info on there. So
wonderful. Stay down in the green room here, Ryan. We'll chat when we're all done. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you all on Monday. Have a great long weekend. Here we go. All righty. It's the end